I believe that Andrew and Meghan have crossed paths. Why did they protect Andrew? And it might be because Andrew could have fired back and said that he does, in fact, know Meghan. It could be a real tit for tat moment for them.
The Yorks have always been protected by Harry and Meghan, but I think the gloves are about to come off. Harry and Meghan are said to be watching developments extremely closely. They are acutely aware that a memoir of that scale would inevitably revisit the most contentious chapters of recent royal history, and they are anxious about how their actions and private exchanges might be framed.
For years, one question hovered over the entire Sussex story with unusual force. Why did Harry and Meghan never go after Prince Andrew? They wrote one of the most explosive royal memoirs in living memory. They sat with Oprah and made allegations that shook the monarchy. They fought with the British press, gave interview after interview, named names, described grievances, and exposed private tensions that had once remained behind palace walls. Yet when it came to Andrew, the Duke of York, they almost entirely fell silent. In Spare, he received only the briefest mention, and even that was not really about him. The focus remained on Harry's own security, not on his uncle. For two people willing to burn so many bridges so publicly, the silence around Andrew stood out like a glaring gap, and the longer it lasted, the louder it became. That silence now looks newly important because something has shifted. Sarah Ferguson stands at the center of that shift. For decades, she was underestimated, treated as marginal, tolerated when convenient, and cast aside whenever she became embarrassing. Now she is preparing a book, and the people most unnerved by that possibility are not palace courtiers or royal advisors. The real anxiety circles around Harry and Meghan. That alone changes the atmosphere. If the prospect of Sarah Ferguson putting her story on paper alarms them more than it alarms the institution itself, then the danger she represents goes far beyond nostalgia, grievance, or old scandal. It suggests the existence of knowledge that cuts directly across some of the most sensitive and least discussed corners of the Sussex years. The wider royal world is already under pressure. The fallout from the Sussex split never truly ended. The controversies around Andrew never disappeared, they deepened. The outer branches of the Windsor family have been pushed into an increasingly unstable position, and Sarah Ferguson now finds herself in one of the most vulnerable moments of her life. She no longer has the shelter she once had. Royal Lodge is no longer hers. The institution she married into has not offered her a clear path back. Andrew, whom she defended through every humiliation and every new disaster, has become more burden than refuge. Her daughters, Beatrice and Eugenie, face uncertain futures within the royal framework. Money, always a recurring problem in her life, remains a problem still. Reports place her in highly discreet wellness retreats in Switzerland and in borrowed villas and expensive hideaways, while those around her describe a woman short of funds and short of permanent security. That combination has always made her volatile, and now it also makes her dangerous. There is a special force in a person who feels abandoned, financially cornered, and stripped of the last meaningful reasons to stay quiet. Sarah Ferguson knows the royal family from the inside, but she has always occupied an uncomfortable position within it, neither fully embraced nor fully expelled. She sat at the table during some of the most turbulent decades in modern royal history. She lived through the wars inside the House of Windsor, the divorces, the aftershocks of Diana, the efforts to rebuild the monarchy, the collapse of Andrew's standing, and then the rise of the Sussex crisis. She knows the family's private loyalties and public cruelties. She knows how it protects some people and abandons others. Most of all, she remembers. That memory matters because she is not naturally restrained. Her instinct has never been diplomacy for its own sake. She speaks emotionally, bluntly, and often more plainly than the people around her would prefer. That trait has cost her before. Her memoir from the mid-1990s was candid enough to damage her friendship with Diana, and that did not happen by accident. A woman does not publish something that costs her Diana's friendship unless she has decided that her own truth matters more than preserving someone else's comfort. That older version of Fergie, the one who wrote what she genuinely thought and accepted the fallout afterward, is exactly the version that creates fear now. The careful, loyal, strategic Fergie depended on having something to protect. As those protections disappear one by one, so do the reasons for caution. Publishing makes the danger even sharper. Major houses are already circling. She has written or co-written more than 60 books across her career and understands the industry extremely well. She watched what Harry's memoir achieved. She saw the scale of the advance, the sales, the media domination, the way the world devoured a royal insider account once it was framed as confession, grievance, and revelation. She knows exactly what the right story can command. For the first time in a very long time, she also has the personal, financial, and emotional circumstances that make writing such a book feel not reckless but rational. The whispers in publishing have moved past vague curiosity into serious conversation. Not another light book, not another children's title, but a proper memoir, a no-holds-barred account of her life inside the royal family, backed by a very substantial advance. What makes that prospect so explosive is not merely that she has lived through scandal. It is that she would not be writing as the main subject of the story. She would be writing as a witness. And witnesses are always more dangerous than participants defending themselves. Harry could frame Spare as his own pain, Meghan could present interviews as her own truth, Netflix could dress its version in the language of storytelling and sympathy. Sarah Ferguson would occupy a different position entirely. She was there, she watched, she heard, she formed judgments from direct experience. That gives her a kind of authority that neither palace briefings nor tabloid reporting can easily match. The question of what she knows falls into two broad areas. The first concerns the Sussex years themselves. Harry and Meghan were not distant from the Yorks. If anything, they were closest to that branch of the family among the extended royals. There was a natural affinity there. Two couples who, in different ways, existed outside the core center of power and who could look at William and Catherine from a position of grievance and exclusion. That closeness matters because it means Sarah Ferguson did not hear things secondhand. She saw how Meghan behaved after joining the family. She saw the treatment of staff, the private dynamics, the contrast between what was happening inside and what was being projected publicly. Many people have hinted at those tensions, many journalists have reported around them, many staff stories have circulated, but very few insiders from the family itself have ever publicly confirmed them. Fergie could. That possibility is what makes confirmation more threatening than gossip. When palace aides complain, it can be dismissed as institutional spite. When journalists report difficult behavior, it can be framed as media hostility or a smear campaign. But if a woman who married into the family, sat at the same tables, and has her own painful history with the institution were to say plainly that she saw it with her own eyes, the dismissals would become much harder to sustain. The danger would not lie in rumor, it would lie in corroboration. The second category is more delicate, more speculative, and potentially even more volatile. It concerns Meghan's life before royalty, the circles she moved in, the social world around private clubs, wealthy networks, charity events, and the kind of elite spaces where proximity matters and connections linger. The silence around Andrew begins to look especially strange in that context. If there had truly been nothing there, if neither Harry nor Meghan had any reason to handle Andrew differently from the rest of the family, then the logical expectation would have been straightforward. He would have received the same treatment everyone else did. Instead, he was largely aware that silence becomes even harder to ignore when placed beside the public record involving Andrew's wider world. A lawyer connected to Virginia Giuffre's case publicly indicated that Meghan may have had knowledge relevant to matters concerning Andrew and wanted her testimony. That was not a casual gossip item floating through entertainment media. It emerged in a legal context attached to a serious attorney, and yet mainstream coverage barely pursued it. The lack of interest from major outlets is in itself striking. The question is not whether every implication drawn from that fact is proven. The question is why almost nobody wanted to explore it at all. This is where the idea of mutual protection begins to make sense. The Yorks and the Sussexes may never have had any formal pact, but their behavior suggests an understanding. Two family branches, both exposed, both vulnerable, both with reason to fear what might surface if the other turned hostile, appear to have observed a line neither crossed. Harry and Meghan went after Charles, Camilla, William, Catherine, the courtiers, and the British press. Andrew, already ruined in public life and therefore an easy target on the surface, was almost untouched. That looks less like mercy than calculation. When one side knows things the other side may not want discussed, silence becomes a form of insurance. The most persuasive explanation is that both camps understood the costs of escalation. If Meghan had moved in circles that touched people in places also connected to Andrew, if photographs existed, if witnesses existed, if there were shared acquaintances or shared settings that had never fully entered public view, then Andrew possessed a form of quiet leverage. In that kind of arrangement, the rule is simple. You do not come for me, and I do not come for you. It is not loyalty in any noble sense, it is deterrence. The problem now is that the old equilibrium is breaking down. Sarah Ferguson is no longer securely bound by the logic that kept everyone cautious. She has lost too much. The benefits of loyalty have evaporated. The faint warmth of still belonging, even from the margins, is fading. Once that happens, silence stops looking prudent and starts looking expensive. A woman who believes there is nothing left to save becomes capable of saying things others never would. Her own history suggests she knows exactly how to make such a move. She has never been naive about money. She understands what publishing rewards. She understands that a truly sensational book must offer more than nostalgia or wounded self-pity. It needs revelations with the power to dominate global headlines, to generate endless commentary, and to force the royal family into a position where every silence becomes meaningful. Harry showed her the market. She knows the price of confession now. She also knows that the right story, released at the right moment, can become an event rather than just a book. But the stakes for her are not purely personal. Beatrice and Eugenie sit uneasily at the edge of this decision. They are no longer children attached to their parents' story. They are grown women with husbands, children, ambitions, and futures of their own. Yet they cannot fully escape the shadow of Andrew, of Fergie, or of the financial and reputational questions surrounding their branch of the family. William's position toward them has become increasingly clear. He has excluded them from central moments, reportedly instructed senior royals to avoid being photographed with them, and pressed for financial clarity around York affairs. That matters because it signals something larger than personal coldness. It reflects a new standard being imposed at the center of the monarchy. Transparency and accountability are no longer optional. That is a profound break from the way previous generations managed embarrassment. The late Queen absorbed scandal by containing it, by moving people quietly aside while maintaining outward family unity. William does not appear interested in that method. His approach is harsher, clearer, and more institutional. Meet the standard or stand outside the line. That shift leaves very little room for sentimental reintegration, especially where unresolved financial questions remain. Reports involving discussions around using Beatrice and Eugenie's names and royal connections to solve money problems have only intensified the pressure. Whether every plan was executed matters less than the fact that such possibilities were seriously contemplated at all. Sarah Ferguson knows what was discussed. She knows what was decided, what was tried, and what happened afterward. If she writes a memoir, what she includes will matter. What she omits may matter just as much. Silence inside the book would tell its own story. So would selective candor. Either way, the daughter's position becomes entangled in the mother's calculations. At the center of all this sits Harry, and his own silence around Andrew remains one of the most revealing features of the whole saga. Harry grew up in that family. He attended the same events, moved in the same world, heard the same whispers, and had the same access to private knowledge about his uncle as any close family member of his generation would have had. He was old enough to understand what was being said and old enough to form his own view. Yet through every public revelation, every scandal, every disastrous Andrew interview, and the entire writing of Spare, he chose not to say what many assumed he could have said. That restraint looks extraordinary when placed beside what he was willing to disclose about everyone else. The people he named in his memoir were real people who suffered real damage from his disclosures. If Andrew's story had simply been another example of institutional hypocrisy ripe for attack, it should have fit perfectly into Harry's broader case against the monarchy. Instead, he left it mostly untouched. That suggests deliberation, not oversight. He knew where not to go. The longer one follows that logic, the more it circles back to the same conclusion. Mutual protection was real, whether formally acknowledged or not. The Yorks and the Sussexes operated with an understanding that each side possessed enough sensitive material to make open warfare dangerous. For years, that understanding held. Harry and Meghan did not intensify Andrew's already catastrophic downfall. The Yorks, in turn, did not publicly expose what they may have known about Meghan's past circles, the Sussex private conduct, or the private dynamics behind the public image. Now, with Sarah Ferguson contemplating a memoir, that last surviving line of restraint may be about to break. If it does, the consequences could go well beyond the Sussexes themselves. The monarchy is already strained by estrangement, illness, succession pressure, and the slow rebuilding of public trust. Charles remains caught in an impossible position, a father with enduring love for his son but little room to express it without appearing to betray William and Catherine. William's stance has hardened. Harry may privately long for something closer to his old life, but his public behavior keeps moving in the opposite direction. Meghan's American identity, commercial brand, and moral narrative all depend on the monarchy remaining the villain from which she and Harry escaped. Reconciliation under those conditions becomes less a realistic hope than a sentimental fantasy. Into that already unstable picture steps Sarah Ferguson, carrying grievances, debts, memories, loyalties, resentments, and now freedom. She is no longer protecting a place that still protects her. She is no longer defending an arrangement that still benefits her. She is, perhaps the first time in her public life, acting as her own full agent. That is what makes her so unpredictable and so dangerous. Harry and Meghan cannot dismiss her as a palace puppet. She is too estranged for that. The palace cannot easily control her. She no longer needs it. She exists outside the old lines of command, and that is exactly what makes her words potentially devastating. The broader truth illuminated by her situation is uncomfortable but clear. Silence works only as long as the people who hold it still believe silence serves them. Once they decide it does not, entire structures of managed narrative can collapse with shocking speed. The Sussex years have generated a growing list of people who know things, who stayed quiet for reasons of loyalty, caution, or self-interest, and who may not stay quiet forever. Sarah Ferguson is only the most immediate and visible example of that larger risk. Another layer deepens the tension. There are reports that Netflix may revisit royal scandal through special episodes focused on particular controversies, with Andrew near the top of the list. A dramatization on that scale would not merely revive old embarrassment, it would shape public understanding for a new generation. For millions of younger viewers, dramatization effectively becomes history. Once that process begins, neither the palace nor the Sussexes would control how those links, circles, and overlapping worlds are imagined by the public. That loss of control is one of the defining anxieties of the current royal moment. They cannot retract Spare. They cannot erase what Netflix has already done. They can only try with diminishing success to manage what comes next. And what comes next may be a memoir from the one person uniquely positioned to connect Andrew, the Yorks, the Sussexes, and the hidden architecture of the years when all those stories ran side by side. Sarah Ferguson now stands at a crossroads. One path leads to continued silence and a fading hope that restraint might somehow preserve a path back for her daughters and grandchildren. The other leads to the book, the money, the final say, and the chance to place on the record what she knows about Harry, Meghan, Andrew, and the private exchanges that have remained unspoken for so long. It is a remarkable position, and it carries its own kind of poetic symmetry. Harry and Meghan built much of their public life on the exposure of private grievance, on the conviction that untold truths must eventually be spoken. Now that same logic may be turning toward them. The choices they made, the people they used, the silences they kept, and the arrangements they benefited from may have helped create the very circumstances that now threaten them most. If Sarah Ferguson decides there is truly nothing left to protect, then the question is no longer whether she can cause damage, it is how much.